Hello lovely people, this is all about female language, gender, and the type of languages that it brings with it. And it's a whole bunch of linguist quotes, so you want to be pausing and writing things down. Keeping in mind you want to make these quotes short, memorable, and things you can pull out of your brain during an examination. Alright, so a lot of these things are drawn from this book, which I read in a mad haste, and I just thought it was such a good summary and synthesis of some of the broad topics. That rather than pretend that I came up with the ideas, I just include short little sections and add a little bit of contextual information around it to kind of guide your thinking. So if, as this piece hasn't got a particular scholar attached to it, then we quote Amanda Montell, feminist linguist. I've added that distinction just to make it a bit obvious and a bit easier for you to track the sort of viewpoint we're coming from. But full of great quotes around this topic.
Like extremely serious. Do men not know how to have conversation?
If you are interested in exploring this exact question, there is a fantastic book called Word Salute by Amanda Montell. Amanda is a linguist by trade, and she explores in this book how different genders are socialized to speak differently, to have different interpersonal dialogues, the words that we use to describe ourselves and to describe others. In regards to the original video asking, do men know how to have conversations? I don't have the book with me because I'm on vacation, but there is a chapter in the book in which Amanda looks at how men are socialized to have conversations versus women. And I'm summarizing here, but essentially men are socialized to have conversations vertically, whereas women are socialized to have conversations that are horizontal, meaning men have conversations to dominate, to one-up each other. It's very final, there's no collaboration. Women are socialized to have more horizontal conversations that are more collaborative. In fact, the idea that we end things with upspeak because we aren't sure, we're not confident. Some linguists actually think that we do that because we're leaving room for collaboration, dialogue. It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's kind of a really good summary for us. So we're going back in time a little bit. Some of these theories and kind of general societal viewpoints will be discussed. Keeping in mind for this area of study, we're doing basically sociolinguistics. So it's more about society and language than just kind of pure language. So there's never always necessarily a correct answer. It's much more, as with most things, societal. Depends on the context, depends on identity, depends on background, history, etc., etc. But broadly speaking, in the decade the 90s, we saw a real clear push of females into the public sphere. So, the Spice Girls, girl power, those kind of things. And as a result, broadly speaking, we saw a real pushback through a range of linguistic means. So we get books like this, 1989, just before the 90s began, The Real Difference Between Men and Women. And that's a pair of authors there. And these are some of the things that they have quoted as saying in the book, just to give a bit of an insight into sort of where the myths come from of male and female. Like if you just look at the book cover, it's a really strong indication that took off in the public sphere that, there were these kind of simple dichotomies, men, women, that there was, diverse differences between them. And in 1992, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. This is sort of perhaps the breakout hit on the topic of gendered language and how it's different. And, as it says in that quote there, it's very clearly basically saying that, different genders are from different planets, and that was a very strong belief at the time, and also partly kind of a pushing back, I guess, as women entered more of the professional public spheres, a way of sort of the males claiming that space as their own to some extent. So 2013, the essential difference. So again, it's not that old, maybe 20 years now, but the idea kind of hasn't really died out. It remains a dominant myth in our culture. And the broad speaking concept is, as with most myths, we go back to, the olden days when people were Neanderthals living in caves, doing all those sort of things. And so the broad theory of this myth is that females were, in the cave or in the kitchen, or they were crafting, they were making baskets, weaving, preparing food, so their conversation can be more collaborative, more interactive, more whatever. Whereas men, they're competing, their language is for argument, for one-upmanship, for fighting. It's short, it's precise, and it's, limited, basically. These are the broad myths. But as Amanda says in her book, female language is sort of, it's kind of the view of a jazz musician, a jazz performance. Anyone can jump in, take the floor, and even if you think of taking, holding, or giving the floor, like those broad concepts are very, in real language, if you look at the example on the left, they don't really stand up because people, they back channel, they minimally respond, they do all these things that shows that, you know, the floor is really quite a, you know, quite a dynamic space. And as she says, if you want to insult a woman, call her a prostitute. If you want to insult a man, call him a woman. So broadly speaking, that is true, and that gives us a bit of an insight into the way that our language is gendered in and of itself, and also the attitudes that it has. This is just a nice little vignette of the idea that young girls sort of play or practice at being mothers, but a nice little contrasting point to that about perhaps that they're just doing some interesting things. Useful, I think, to pause. In a UCLA study found that this percentage of slang words for describing women were negative, whereas this percentage of words to describe men were negative. So take a moment to consider what percentage would you guess or would you predict, and then alas, the answer is here. So we're looking at 90% for women and 46% for men. And as we know, English across time, we've got deterioration where a word becomes more negatively connotated. We've got broadening where a very specific word is applied to many more lexical subjects, I guess. And then we've got elevation where words sort of increase in positive connotations. So keeping that in mind in these processes from Unit 1 and 2, think about males and females and take a guess at what direction or what process best fits with female language or language to describe females. And then we've got some simple terms on the left there. And as you know, the semantic derogatation of women, semantic change, so there's those processes, and you can see and pause and explore those yourself. So Sally McGonigal-Guiney, it's kind of the idea of intuition, emotional intelligence, those sort of things. Again, you can be quoting Amanda on this one because this is her text, but she's referencing Sally McGonigal-Guiney, who is putting forward the idea that women are a bit more intuitive and aware of what's going on, and perhaps that influences their communication style. So Robin Lecoff, Language in Women's Place. Judging from the cover, you can probably work out a fair bit about how it all works. But again, pause and see if you think any of these quotes relate to your work. And then carrying on, we've got Judith Butler, who talks about gender performativity, which is basically what we think of as actually quite a modern conception. We would probably call it sex performativity, or we might change it, but essentially it's the belief that you're basically born the way you are, AFAB, AMAB, female assigned at birth or male assigned at birth, and then from then on you sort of choose to perform the gender or the sex that you've been assigned and pursued. Deborah Tannen, again, is sort of an interesting counterpoint, a little bit more linguistic in nature, but we're back in the 90s here, men and women in conversation and how they don't understand each other, and the sort of broad concept is that they have different purposes and different reasons for communicating the way that they do. Then we've got Janet Holmes, Women, Men, and Politeness. So 1995, so again, a little bit newer, and you can see we're looking at, those things there noted. All right, women behaving badly. Ooh, girl talk. Genderlex. So this is not in the study design, the idea of genderlex, but you can see kind of how it would fit. Idiolect, sociolect, dialect, ethnolect. Genderlect never really made it fully into the lexicon, but it's something you could explore or write about in your own piece. And her paper, Women Behaving Badly, Female Speakers Backstage, which is basically trying to look at the idea of what we often call locker room talk for men, and sort of trying to get examples of women's language, behind the scenes rather than in any public space. Duels and duets, why men and women talk so differently. So there you go, that's a quote from John L. Locke. Then we've got hedging. This is all about hedging, women, men and language from 2015. And we've got Jennifer Coates, who's pictured down in the left there, and that is her book. And some examples of hedging language that, and it's sort of exploring, do you think hedging is a pro-social, accommodating strategy, or do you think it's an indication of lack of confidence? All of these ideas are sort of something that you'll have to fall down on and have sort of a general opinion in regards to feminine language or gendered language and what it suggests overall, and obviously depending on context, etc., etc. All right, so we're looking at vocal fry, uptalk, and the Valley Girl concept, which is sort of the so like I'm not really sure, and you know the general opinion is that it's viewed quite poorly. The attitudes towards it are quite negative, let's say, but you know these features, those particular features are features of that sociolect, and exploring the kind of attitudes towards it is an interesting approach. All right, and then just in closing, we know it's generally assumed and understood that young females are the drivers of linguistic innovation, and you can see in the cartoon kind of how that changes across time, and it's something generally understood. So in the top right-hand corner, you could quote Amanda Montell for that, and towards the left, we've got some other examples. So I hope you've been pausing throughout and finding some good quotes to use as linguist quotes in your essays when writing about gender and gendered language. Cheers.